Avoidants don't move toward you the way most people do. They don't run in your direction with grand gestures or emotional declarations. Their version of chasing is quieter, slower, almost invisible. And if you're not paying attention, you might think they're pulling away because they're done. But the truth is far more complex and far more emotional than they'd ever admit. When an avoidant pulls back, it's not always rejection. It's regulation, a way of steadying themselves when the feelings get too intense. Their mind becomes loud, their chest tight, their thoughts tangled. So what looks like distance to you feels like survival to them. They need space the way other people need reassurance. Distance isn't their punishment, it's their coping mechanism. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. While they're creating that space, they're still watching you, not in an obvious way, not with messages or calls or long paragraphs explaining themselves, but through presence, through subtle monitoring, through quiet awareness. They read your updates, they check your stories, they reread old messages. They hover around the edges of your life, making sure the connection isn't slipping away completely. You think they forgot you? No. Avoidants forget the people they don't care about. But when they're emotionally invested, their silence becomes observant. Their distance becomes attention. Their absence becomes a form of closeness. They feel safe controlling. They're not gone, they're regrouping. Regrouping from the fear of losing themselves inside you. Regrouping from the intensity of what they felt when you were close. Regrouping from emotions they never learned how to hold without dropping. When you got close, something inside them woke up, something warm, unfamiliar, overwhelming. And overwhelming feelings for an avoidant don't feel like love at first. They feel like danger, like exposure, like the slow unraveling of a world they've kept tightly stitched for years. So they step back, not because they want distance from you, but because they want distance from their own reactions. In that space, they're trying to understand why you affect them the way you do, why your presence felt comforting but terrifying, why their heart moved before their mind had time to build its walls, why you slipped past their emotional defenses without even trying. And while they analyze, compartmentalize, and talk themselves down, they keep checking on you. Because distance is not the absence of emotion, it's the management of it. And avoidants only manage emotions. They're afraid to lose, so when they pull away, don't assume it means you meant nothing. Often, it means the opposite. It means you meant enough to overwhelm them, enough to scare them, enough to make them step back so they don't ruin what they secretly want to move toward. Avoidants don't chase with footsteps. They chase with distance because distance keeps them steady enough to find their way back to you. When an avoidant pulls away but keeps the connection intact, that is their version of chasing subtle, quiet, almost unrecognizable, unless you understand their emotional wiring. Avoidants don't disappear from people they're done with. Their exits are clean, sharp, and intentional. They vanish without hesitation when a bond feels empty or when their heart stays untouched. But when someone matters, when someone gets under their skin and reaches the parts of them they never learned to show, something different happens. They pull away, but they don't let go. The cord remains. The thread stays. The distance is controlled, not final. That almost there, almost gone state is where the avoidant heart reveals itself most honestly. They only distance themselves from people who matter too much, not from people who don't matter at all. In fact, the more they feel, the more space they believe they need. It's backward to most people, but for an avoidant, closeness triggers self-preservation, not comfort. When emotions deepen, their fear deepens with it. Fear of losing independence, fear of being consumed, fear of disappointing someone they secretly care for, fear of needing someone so much that it threatens the identity they spent years building alone. So the space they create isn't abandonment. It's their attempt to breathe without losing the connection altogether. They want the bond to live, but they need distance to survive their own feelings. So when an avoidant pulls back but continues to watch your stories, keeps your number, stays connected to your world, or reappears just enough to make sure the tie isn't broken, That's not confusion. That's intentional. That is them keeping a connection they're terrified to lose. To you, it might feel like inconsistency, mixed signals, emotional whiplash, but to them, it's the safest level of closeness they can handle while still protecting the relationship from the emotional overload they're afraid of. It's not rejection, it's maintenance, it's regulation, it's their version of holding on. In their mind, cutting the cord would mean cutting off someone who became significant, someone who touched them in a way they didn't expect, someone who made them feel more than they were ready to confront. So they don't cut it, they stretch it. They loosen it. They put a little distance in the middle so they don't drown in the intensity of connection, but they never let it snap because losing you feels scarier than needing space from you. And here's the hidden truth. If they didn't care, they wouldn't bother managing the space at all. They wouldn't come back with those quiet reappearances. They wouldn't monitor the distance. They wouldn't worry about how far they've drifted. Their subtle presence, their almost silence, their delicate balance of closeness and space. It's all part of their chase. Not a chase toward you, but a chase toward emotional safety that still includes you. In their world, that is the purest, most vulnerable form of pursuit they know. Avoidants may not chase you with messages, calls, or constant contact, but their quiet attachment shows up in the way they make sure you don't leave first. They won't flood your phone, but they hover in the background like a silent reassurance that they're still there. Not fully present, but not gone either. They stay connected online, not because they're indifferent, but because they need to know the thread between you hasn't snapped. They'll watch your stories within minutes, scroll through your posts, and check for any signs that your life is shifting away from them, not because they want to control you, but because they want to feel safe before they step forward again. Their distance is protective, but their watchfulness is attachment. They're terrified of appearing too invested, yet even more terrified of being forgotten by someone they quietly care about. Avoidants are experts at emotional surveillance. Subtle, invisible, almost unnoticeable, unless you know what to look for. They track your energy, your patterns, your presence. If you start drifting, they feel it instantly. And even though they may not reach out directly, they'll respond in their own understated ways, liking a post, watching your story a little too fast, sending an accidental emoji that wasn't so accidental, or resurfacing with a casual check-in just when you start to pull back yourself. To someone else, it might look like coincidence, but to an avoidant, it's intentional. It's their safety net. It's their way of keeping the emotional door cracked open without risking the vulnerability of knocking. You might think, if they care, why don't they just come forward? But for an avoidant, forward feels dangerous. Forward feels like exposure. Forward feels like handing someone the power to hurt them. So they move sideways instead, hovering, observing, maintaining just enough connection to feel secure, but not enough to feel overwhelmed. They protect themselves by staying out of emotional intensity, but they protect the bond by refusing to let it fully fade. It's a delicate dance between fear and affection, between longing and caution, between wanting closeness and needing space to hold it. The truth is, avoidants don't worry about losing people they're not attached to. They don't monitor the presence of someone they're indifferent about. If they're tracking you, even in silence, it means you've reached a place inside them that most people never get to see. They're quiet monitoring their subtle digital footprints, their unspoken presence. These are all signs of emotional investment. To them, this is the safest form of chasing, staying close enough to feel connected, far enough to feel stable, but always making sure you haven't closed the door. They're scared to walk through, because deep down, avoidants fear one thing more than closeness: abandonment. So while they may keep their distance to manage their emotions, they keep their eyes on you to make sure you won't disappear. It's not the chase you're used to. But in their world, making sure you don't leave first is the chase. Quiet, cautious, but real. Avoidants don't chase with emotional intensity or romantic pursuit. They chase through control by managing the distance, the pace, and the emotional temperature of the connection. To them, closeness isn't comforting at first, it's titalizing. So instead of moving toward you, they adjust how close you are. allowed to get. They keep you at a safe distance, not because they don't want you, but because that distance helps them feel steady enough to stay connected at all. What looks like pulling away from the outside is often them building a controlled space where the bond feels survivable. Their nervous system interprets closeness as threat, so distance becomes their grounding tool. It's not about rejecting you, it's about containing the intensity they feel with you, so they don't get lost in it. To the avoidant, control equals safety. When emotions start rising, when intimacy deepens, when your presence stirs something warm and unsettling inside them, they instinctively regulate by stepping back, not to escape you, but to regain their emotional footing. This space they create is like oxygen. Without it, they feel suffocated by their own feelings. But here's the part most people miss. If they truly didn't care, they wouldn't bother managing the connection at all. They would simply walk away, close the door, and never look back. Distance without control is detachment. Distance with control is attachment. It means they're invested enough to preserve the bond in the only way they know how. Deep down, avoidants fear that losing control means losing themselves. They've built independence like armor, carried self-sufficiency like identity, and relied on emotional distance as a survival skill. So when someone touches their heart, the fear isn't that the relationship will fail. The fear is that they will, that they won't be enough, that they'll disappoint you, that they'll lose themselves in the vulnerability closeness demands. This fear pushes them to pull back, but not to let go. Pulling back is how they stay in the connection without drowning. So the retreat you see isn't running away, it's recalibrating. It's them trying to make the connection feel less overwhelming, more breathable, more manageable. They want you close enough to feel connected, but far enough to feel safe. This careful balancing act, this emotional distance they maintain, is actually how they chase the relationship. Because if they felt nothing, they wouldn't fight to regulate the bond. They wouldn't control the pace. They wouldn't adjust the distance. They would simply disappear. But when they care, they start managing their emotions, managing your closeness, managing the space that keeps them steady. Avoidants don't chase by moving toward you. They chase by keeping the connection controlled enough to survive. They protect the bond, not through closeness, but through the distance that allows them to come back without fear. Avoidants don't manage distance with people who mean nothing to them. They only organize their emotions around the ones they secretly fear losing. When someone is unimportant, their withdrawal is sharp, final, effortless, a clean break with hesitation. But when you matter, when something in your presence disarms them, when your energy slips past their defenses in ways they didn't expect, their distance becomes cautious, calculated, carefully measured. They pull away softly, not abruptly. They step back strategically, not indifferently. They regulate their emotions around you because the connection holds weight, and that weight scares them. To an avoidant, caring is not expressed through closeness, it's revealed through the way they handle distance. Their retreat isn't a rejection of you, it's a reflection of how intensely they feel and how little they trust themselves to manage those feelings without creating damage. They aren't distancing themselves from you, they're distancing themselves from the rising intensity inside them, the vulnerability, the longing, the unfamiliar sense of being seen. When emotions swell beyond what they're comfortable holding, they shift into self-protection. But instead of slamming the door shut, they leave it cracked. Instead of disappearing, they drift. Instead of silence, they offer minimal presence. This gentler withdrawal is not apathy, but care. The quiet confession they can't verbalize. It's their way of saying, I need space to not fall apart, even though the words never leave their mouth. Their instinct is to regulate, not erase. And when you watch them pull back with caution instead of coldness, that's the clearest sign you've reached a depth inside them that terrifies and attaches them at the same time. Avoidants manage distance the way some people manage conflict, with precision. They calculate how far they can step back without losing the bond, how long they can be quiet without making you feel abandoned, how much space they need without risking the connection unraveling. This kind of emotional strategy doesn't happen with everyone. It only happens when their feelings run deep enough to unsettle their emotional equilibrium. And because they've spent years relying on independence as a shield, the thought of needing someone, truly needing someone, feels like exposure. Their controlled retreat is an attempt to hold the connection without losing themselves in it. So, when an avoidant pulls away but does so gently, almost respectfully, in a way that still keeps the thread between you intact, understand the emotional truth beneath that behavior. It's because you matter more than they can handle all at once. Their distance is a form of care. Their silence is an effort to protect both you and themselves. Their strategic retreat is not an exit, it's a reset. And that reset is only necessary when the feelings are real. In their world, if they didn't care, they wouldn't manage anything. They would simply vanish. But when they care, they step back in a way that still keeps the connection alive. Because losing you would hurt far more than the discomfort of facing their own emotions. Avoidants pay far more attention to your reactions than to the words you send. Your messages matter, but your emotional temperature matters more. When they pull away, they're not just retreating, they're observing quietly, carefully, almost scientifically. They want to see what you do with the space they create. Do you panic? Do you chase? Do you explode with fear or demand answers they aren't ready to give? Or do you stay calm, grounded, and unthreatening? Your response determines how safe they feel returning. They don't need you to be emotionless. They just need you to not make their internal overwhelm worse. The moment they sense pressure, urgency, or emotional chaos, their instinct screams for more distance. But when your reaction stays stable, gentle, patient, something inside them unclenches. They feel less hunted by expectations and more welcomed by understanding. And for an avoidant, safety is the gateway back to connection. Because avoidants aren't just watching what you say, they're watching what your behavior means. If you chase, they interpret it as emotional demand. If you panic, they interpret it as burden. If you guilt trip them, they interpret it as danger. But if you breathe through the distance with grace, if you let them retreat without punishment, they experience something rare, a bond that doesn't trap them. This softens them in ways they don't talk about. It makes them feel seen, accepted, and emotionally unthreatened. It gives them room to regulate without fearing that their space will be taken as abandonment. And in that room, their affection grows, not shrinks. They begin to trust the connection more because it feels like something they can participate in without losing themselves. Avoidants track patterns. They notice if you become clingy at the first sign of distance. They notice if you get angry when they step back. They notice if you mirror their retreat or if you maintain your center. They're not testing you to be manipulative. They're testing the safety of the emotional environment. Your reaction tells them whether being close to you will be a soothing experience or a suffocating one. And oftentimes they're not waiting for you to reach out. They're waiting to see whether your reaction confirms their worst fears or contradicts them. They want to feel that if they return, they won't walk back into emotional chaos or accusation. They want to know the connection will be held with compassion, not pressure. This is why avoidants often pull away first, not to punish you, but to watch how the connection behaves without constant contact. It's their way of gathering emotional data. And when they see you handle their distance with steadiness instead of panic, you shift something deep inside them. You become safe. You become the person they can come back to without shame. You become the emotional environment that doesn't bite when touched. And for someone who's spent most of their life equating closeness with danger, that kind of safety pulls them back more powerfully than any message ever could. Avoidants don't chase you by moving forward. They chase you by stepping back long enough to stabilize themselves so they can eventually return. When emotions overwhelm them, their system goes into shutdown mode. It's not a breakup, not a rejection, not a quiet goodbye. It's a reset. Their nervous system floods with intensity. They don't know how to hold, so they do the only thing they've learned keeps them emotionally functional. They retreat. But that retreat is not the end of the story. It's the pause before their next chapter with you. When they step back, they're not trying to erase the connection, they're trying to calm the internal storm the connection created. They need time to soothe the fears you never triggered intentionally. The fear of needing someone, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of losing control of their emotions, the fear of slipping into a closeness they aren't equipped to maintain. This shutdown becomes the space where they try to breathe again, where they sort their thoughts, where they untangle the intensity of what they feel for you without the pressure of being seen. During this reset, They're not analyzing you, they're analyzing themselves, wondering why they reacted so strongly, why their chest tightened, in moments of affection, why your presence stirred emotions they've buried for years, why their heart leaned toward you faster than their mind could build its usual walls. They step back to figure out how to hold the connection without losing their emotional balance. And once they regain that balance, once they finally feel steady, they drift back quietly, softly, as if nothing happened. Their return isn't dramatic, it's subtle, almost casual, a message that feels lighter than the weight of their absence. A small interaction disguised as a check-in. A simple hey that carries the meaning of I'm okay now. Can we reconnect? To anyone else, it might look insignificant, but to an avoidant, it's huge. It means they've tamed the chaos inside enough to re-enter the bond without fear of drowning in it. Their comeback is not impulsive. It's intentional. They don't return until they feel emotionally grounded enough to be around you again without shutting down. It's their way of honoring the connection, even if the expression is quiet. And while their drifting back may seem nonchalant, it's actually their gentlest confession. They don't announce that they missed you. They show it by reappearing. They don't admit that the silence wasn't about you. They demonstrate it by coming back with steadier energy. That slow, soft re-entry is their version of care. And the fact that they return at all means the connection mattered deeply, because avoidants only stabilize themselves for relationships that touched them, only reset for bonds they fear losing, only come back to people who reached places inside them they never let anyone see in their world. Chasing doesn't look like pursuit. It looks like preparation. It looks like healing. It looks like stepping away just long enough to step toward you again. Avoidants are drawn back to the person who doesn't punish their distance because emotional safety, not intensity, is what their heart responds to. When you hold space instead of demanding closeness, when you don't guilt trip them for needing to breathe, when you don't make their retreat a personal attack, you become the calm in their internal storm. You become the rare presence who understands that their silence isn't meant to hurt you. It's meant to protect themselves. And in their emotional universe, safety is everything. They don't return to pressure. They don't return to chaos. They don't return to someone who makes them feel like they're failing for needing space. But they do return consistently, quietly, almost instinctively, to the person who lets them step back without fear of punishment. That kind of acceptance softens them. It disarms them, makes them feel seen rather than judged. And for an avoidant, feeling understood is the beginning of trust. Avoidants have spent years learning that closeness equals danger, that emotions lead to loss of control, that being needed means being trapped. So when someone reacts to their space with anger or panic, it confirms their old beliefs. It tells them, see, closeness isn't safe. But when someone reacts with steadiness, warmth, and patience, something inside them shifts. Their nervous system relaxes, their fear quiets, their defenses lower. Suddenly, distance doesn't feel like a battlefield, it feels like breathing room. And they don't have to run from someone who doesn't chase them aggressively. They don't have to shut down around someone who respects their emotional rhythm. They don't have to disappear entirely when the bond doesn't demand more than they can give. That person becomes their emotional safe zone, the one connection that doesn't trigger panic. And that safety pulls them back every time, not in grand gestures, but in the way an avoidant returns, subtly, gently, as if sliding back into familiar warmth. They come back through a small message, a quiet reappearance, a simple check-in that carries far more meaning than the words themselves. They return not because you forced it, but because your calm gave them room to choose it. You became the grounding presence they lacked. You showed them that connection doesn't have to feel like suffocation. You proved that they won't be punished for being human, flawed, overwhelmed, or scared. And in a world where they constantly fear disappointing others, the person who doesn't punish them becomes the one they trust with the most fragile parts of themselves. Avoidants don't come back to intensity. They come back to stability. They return to the person who doesn't weaponize their distance. They drift back to the one who doesn't demand explanations they can't articulate. They re-enter the connection where they feel emotionally safe, even in silence, because at the end of the day, avoidance aren't afraid of closeness. They're afraid of losing themselves. And when you give them space without consequence, you become the place where they finally feel free enough to come closer on their own. Avoidants are masters of silence, but that silence is never empty. When they pull away, when they create distance, their minds are far from idle. Every interaction, every word, every glance is replayed and analyzed, often obsessively, in ways they'll never confess aloud. They think about what you said, how you said it, the tone, the pauses, the inflections, and they measure it against their own internal responses, their own fears, their own vulnerabilities. Your laughter, your gaze, the way you leaned toward them or held back, all become a private theater in their mind, scenes they watch repeatedly, seeking meaning, seeking safety, seeking answers they cannot voice. During these quiet moments, the emotions they suppress when with you hit hardest: longing, fear, admiration, attachment, regret. The intensity that they seem to hide when close is magnified when you're not around, because solitude is the mirror in which they can feel without restraint, without judgment, without risking exposure. Their thoughts aren't casual. They dissect the subtle cues you gave, wondering why certain moments felt right and why others triggered alarm. They recall your kindness and your impatience, your warmth and your distance, the way your presence both drew them in and made them flinch. They analyze how they could have responded differently, what they could have said, how they could have protected themselves without pushing you away. Each memory becomes a lesson in emotional survival, a private reckoning with how they handle feelings that feel too big to contain. And while you might interpret their silence as indifference, the truth is that every quiet moment is filled with echoes of you. They are negotiating internally, balancing desire with fear, connection with self-preservation, attachment with avoidance. Avoidants rarely express these thoughts directly because to articulate them is to open themselves to vulnerability they aren't ready to face. Words feel unsafe, too permanent, too revealing, so they live in their minds instead, holding entire conversations and unspoken confessions in private, rehearsing what might happen if they allowed themselves to fully feel. They imagine your reactions, anticipate your responses, and sometimes in the privacy of distance, allow themselves to feel the attachment that proximity usually makes them suppress. And in that silence, they feel both the pain and the desire they struggle to admit, the longing for closeness that scares them, the fear of losing you that terrifies them, and the quiet acknowledgement that you matter more than they often let themselves recognize. Distance amplifies the connection. Your absence makes every emotion sharper, every memory more vivid, every desire more acute. Their silence is a landscape full of unspoken truths, private admissions, and rehearsed words they may never say. And in this quiet, invisible reflection, they chase you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, even when their physical presence is nowhere near. Because for an avoidant, silence is not emptiness. It is the hidden chamber of their heart where you occupy the largest space. Avoidants chase your presence, not by following you actively, but by feeling the weight of your absence. They don't need a breakup, a fight, or a dramatic ending to realize they miss you. All it takes is time alone with their thoughts. In solitude, away from the distractions of proximity, the connection they tried to manage through distance becomes undeniable. Every quiet moment without you is amplified in their mind. They replay interactions, imagine conversations, and feel the subtle emptiness your absence leaves behind. That absence is not just a physical gap. It's a psychological pull, a reminder of the comfort, warmth, and quiet stability they feared yet secretly crave. Distance doesn't weaken their connection, it intensifies it. The very act of stepping away makes them notice what they never allowed themselves to fully feel when close. Your presence, once taken for granted or quietly observed from afar, now occupies their mind, their imagination, and their restrained emotion. This is their chase, not in footsteps or words, but in the internal longing that grows when they are alone and you are not there. And when that longing reaches its peak, it transforms into action. Their comeback is never casual or accidental. Avoidants don't return because it's convenient or because the timing is right. They return because something inside them couldn't remain absent. Something essential, often unspoken, almost inexpressible, pulls them back toward you. Their actions carry the weight of their unvoiced emotions. A text, a small gesture, a reappearance in your life that seems understated, almost casual, but is loaded with meaning. In their world, words are risky. Emotions are heavy, vulnerability is terrifying. So instead of saying, I wanted you the whole time, they let their presence whisper it for them. Their return is their confession. Every subtle action, every careful reconnection, every quiet effort to be near you again is a testament to the attachment they never openly acknowledge. They chase you not with proclamations, but with their measured, deliberate, and often invisible steps back toward the bond they tried to distance themselves from, yet could never release entirely. This duality, feeling absence intensely while returning silently, is the essence of avoidant pursuit. It's a chase that's invisible to those expecting drama or urgency. It's a chase grounded in longing, reflection, and the careful recalibration of emotions they cannot fully expose. And when they finally drift back into your orbit, it's more than presence, it's a quiet acknowledgement of desire, attachment, and need. Their distance made them notice, their absence made them feel, and their return makes their unspoken confession clear. In their world, actions speak louder than words. Their comeback is not just a choice, it's the declaration of a truth they've carried silently, that despite the walls, the fear, and the pull of retreat, they wanted you the entire time and they always will.